Please like by pressing the thumbs up icon below. It costs nothing and helps bump the page up on the algorithm. Subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new content is posted. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Story 58, Catching Her at the Hotel, Part 1 of 2. I married my wife Rachel 8 years ago after dating her for 4, one of which was in high school. We have known each other for most of our lives, and we're nearing our 30s. We do not have kids, but we had planned on having 1 or 2 in the near future. All that changed in early September 2024. It's been long enough that I can tell the story and not lose my mind just thinking about it. I've finally gotten to the point I can talk about it, so here goes. I'm lucky enough to work for a large company that has offices around the U.S. I work in the IT industry and have the option to work from home or go into the local office when needed. My wife works a standard 9-to-5 job in the city. It started with small things, text message notifications that she quickly dismissed when I walked into the room, the way she angled her phone screen away from me while typing, and her beginning to work later hours at the office, citing a demanding new project that seemed to never end. After 8 years of marriage, you develop an intuition about your partner's patterns, and Rachel's had shifted slightly but unmistakably over the past few years. I didn't want to be that paranoid and suspicious husband checking up on his wife like some sort of amateur detective. But the feeling wouldn't subside. There were just too many coincidences and inconsistencies. The way she'd come home some evenings with that glow about her, more than when she'd left that morning. The new perfume she'd started wearing to work differed from the one she wore when we went out together. She stopped responding to texts during lunchtime or in the evening when she was working late, especially on Thursdays. One night, Rachel fell asleep on the couch, so I gave in to my suspicions. Her phone always lay face down when it wasn't in her hand, and for the first time in our relationship, I picked it up with the intention of going through it. Finding her passcode was easy. She only used a few. I went ahead and added myself to unlock with my Face ID in case she changed the password. She never did because I was the clueless husband who always trusted her. It took a while, and I was getting nervous about her waking up, but I did find the messages. She was using a chat program buried in an old games folder. In the app, there were literally thousands of messages to someone named D, stretching back almost 3 years. My hands trembled as I scrolled through their conversations, the intimate good morning messages, the inside jokes, the plans for secret meetings. But what struck me most were the messages about me. She would periodically remind D that she loved me and had no intentions of ever leaving me. She talked about how what she had with D was different. It filled a void, her words, not mine, giving her something she needed, but I was her foundation, her home. She had recently told him that their relationship would end once we had children. The conversation read like a physical thing, but I'd ultimately find out it happened once a week on Thursdays. That hurt on top of the betrayal. We were always active in our physical love life, and she seemed to be happy with it. We shared intimate moments, and she seemed invested in our relationship. So, I didn't even know how to process that she needed sex from another man. It made me wonder about what she was doing before David. Was there some line of guys that had used my wife over the last dozen years? The words just underlined the betrayal. She claimed to love me, but not enough to be faithful, not enough to resist whatever she saw in this guy or others outside our marriage. She never talked to me about whatever that void was in her life so we could work on it. I didn't have time to sit there doing screenshots, so I used my phone to make a video of her chat as I scrolled through it. Later, while I read through it, some patterns showed up in her schedule. The affair had a certain rhythm to it. Thursday lunch meetings at a hotel that stretched to 2 hours, occasional late nights at the office, which was code for dinner dates that always fell on days when I had evening commitments. They were careful, but not always careful enough. There were enough clues in the messages that I was able to figure out it was a manager at her company. She had called him David a few times in the conversation, so I jumped into LinkedIn and started looking at her connections. Funny enough, there were only 2 Davids, and one was quite a bit older than we were. The other David was about our age and showed his face. He was good looking, maybe a bit older than me by a few years. The more I discovered, the more I remembered tiny details that should have alerted me sooner. For example, she'd mentioned David's name casually in work stories and then stopped mentioning him altogether a while back after I had asked her about him. I remembered the business conference early this year, where she'd packed clothes that seemed a bit less professional and more personal than they should have been, a little odd, but not enough to cause me to question her. That was apparently more of a business conference during the day and a 3-day mini getaway for 2 in the evening. The times she'd been unusually passionate with me after returning from networking events. Just thinking about her coming home from having sex with him to be with me makes me want to vomit. How many times I kissed her or did more intimate oral acts on her after she was with him makes me furious. I started following her, something I never imagined I'd do. I'd park blocks away from her office during her Thursday lunches and walk close enough to watch her walk to nearby restaurants with him. They were very subtle in public, professional distance was maintained, and there were no obvious displays of affection. I took pictures and videos of it all. A few times, I did see how their hands would brush as they walked, how she'd laugh at something he said with her whole body, the kind of laugh she'd have for me. Strangely, I can't even remember when that stopped. The hotel was their big mistake. It was late Tuesday afternoon instead of Thursday, and Rachel had texted me about a late meeting with clients. After getting the text, I went to her work and waited. She came out right at 5 p.m., walking with the younger guy on LinkedIn named David. They had a quick exchange. David nodded to my wife, and then he got into his car and drove away. My wife got into her car and left at the same time. I followed Rachel and watched her car pull into the parking garage of the Westin downtown. David's black BMW pulled into the same parking garage 20 minutes later. Something inside me went numb as I sat staring at the hotel entrance in my car. 3 years of deception all came together in what I'd call a moment of clarity or my wake-up call. The Westin lobby was really nice. I was sort of expecting something more seedy, like a motel near her work, but I guess AP has style. I chose one of those high-backed chairs facing the elevators, partially obscured by a large potted plant. I remember the leather being cool and uncomfortable against my back as I waited. I would go into the bar and order drinks while I waited. Time seemed to pass strangely as I sat there thinking about what my wife was doing and the messages I'd read. Although I was there for over 2 hours, it passed like I had snapped my fingers. I was settling in when my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Meeting running late, don't wait for dinner. I watched the words appear on my screen and felt nothing. I decided to text her back and simply told her that we'd need to talk about her meeting at some point. She replied and said she was sorry, but it was work, and we could chat when she got home. I sent back a message saying, yes, we will chat when you get home because we seem to define work differently. But that message went unread. I knew they were almost done when I glanced at my phone, and the text message was showing read. Not too long after that, I could see she was typing. She replied to me with a bunch of question marks, then a "what are you talking about?" I ignored the text, leaving her on read. I heard her voice after 2 hours and 17 minutes as they emerged from the elevator. It was a voice I'd known intimately for a dozen years. I could tell by her tone that she was concerned. She was obviously still reacting to my last message. They emerged not touching, but the comfort in each other's presence, way more familiar than she had the right to have with another guy. My wife had one hand on her cheek while the other held her phone, looking at the screen. David was checking his watch and saying something to her without looking at her. They definitely weren't prepared for me to be there. I heard her tell David something like, "I need to get home right now." He said something I couldn't understand, and then my wife said, "No." The message said he needs to talk to me about my meeting. David was saying something back to her that I still couldn't make out because he was trying to talk in a hushed voice. They were preoccupied as they walked into the lobby from the hallway with the elevators. Rachel saw me first. She stopped sort of mid-stride, her hand going to her mouth, a gesture she'd always made when startled. I didn't move. I simply sat, glass in my hand, and watched as recognition dawned on her face. David noticed her reaction and followed her gaze to where I sat. I could see the understanding register. The color drained from his face too. He took an instinctive step away from my wife. From the text exchanges with my wife. David was married with kids, at least for now. The moment stretched, but I don't really know how long we stood there looking at each other. Rachel's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came out. As her mouth closed the last time, there were tears streaming down her cheeks. She had stopped walking and was just staring at me with this sort of sick horror. Her eyes were wide with what looked like fear, shame, and understanding. I saw the moment she realized everything was over. 8 years of trust and love between us ended along with our marriage. I stood up slowly because my head was light from the drinks. As strange as it seemed, the whiskey had left me calm and in a way, focused, like it blurred my emotions. My eyes held Rachel's. In her eyes, I saw every lie, every secret rendezvous, and the guilt of letting another guy touch her. I saw the woman I'd loved since high school looking back at me, but the woman I was looking at wasn't the person I married. Without a word, I placed my empty glass on the side table and walked toward the revolving door. I can't really explain how sick I felt looking at my wife standing next to a guy in a hotel after screwing him for the last 2 hours. This was not the person that I woke up to every morning. The person that I loved. I can't even begin to explain the bizarre sense of loss and pure anguish that I was feeling as I looked at her. Rachel said my name in a voice that sounded desperate. She turned as I walked past her, reaching out, but I didn't turn back. I didn't acknowledge her. It was like my brain was disconnected. I remember so many stupid little details from that night. I remember the evening air hitting my face as I walked out onto the street, still warm but humid because of the rain. I remember the sound of my wife's hysterical voice being cut off as the door closed behind me, being replaced by the sound of wind and the traffic on the street. 8 years of marriage, thousands of shared moments, and countless promises that turned out to be lies. As much as I'd like to think I was some badass man, this freaking hurt. It hurt more than anything I've been through. As I walked to my car, I thought about the messages I'd read, about Rachel's insistence that she loved me, that I was her foundation. Maybe in her world, that was true in some bizarre way, but I was just crushed. The only thing I could think to do was walk away and put as much distance as I could between us. My mind kept saying, "Get away from her now," over and over. In an effed up way, the rain felt like a statement from the universe about my relationship. I knew I had too much to drink, so I sat behind the wheel for a long time, just listening to its rhythm against the roof. It's so easy to say, yeah, if they cheated on me, I would just leave. Then it happens to you, and you find out that you're sitting in your car waiting for the buzz to wear off, just trying to pull your shit together. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I was truly alone, without my wife next to me. My parents had both passed, my dad from a car accident when I was young and my mom recently from heart disease. That's the kick in the balls to all of this. This really left me with nobody. Somewhere behind me, in a hotel lobby, my wife stood next to another man, facing the consequences of her choices and the destruction of our marriage. This is the end of part 1.
I only post new and unique content. Please like and subscribe.